Okay, we're recording. So this is the architecture meeting from January 21st. I'm going to go ahead and share the doc. There's not much there today. So go ahead and throw your uh, sign in there. If I can find chat, I'll throw the link in there. Okay, so there's the link. So, last week we had, hang on. So last week we did the meeting with the folks around application sets. And I thought it was interesting that my big takeaway on it was on the Spinnaker side, they did not have a way to package components together. So components were packaged together by taking a Helm chart and adding everything that you needed for that application to run in the Helm chart. And this is very similar to what you see like with Bitnami. If you ever wanted to go and install like WordPress in your Kubernetes cluster, the Helm chart for WordPress contains not only like the WordPress install, but what is needed for the database. So it'll have my like a MySQL, and it'll do some other, like 3 or 4 steps to install WordPress on a Kubernetes cluster. So that was interesting, I thought, from the Spinnaker side, that they were approaching it like that, where components are actually as part of the Helm chart. And then on the Argo side, Argo just doesn't really even have that. The one thing that they're doing with their application sets was a way to do a more of a templating mechanism that will allow you to basically reuse the same deployment manifest over and over, and substitute different values in for like a different cluster. So their use case is more along the lines of, I have 100 clusters that I want to send this deployment file to, and it needs to be tweaked for each cluster. How do we do that? And that's what they were considering an application set. Now, the one thing I did see was neither one of them have what I was calling a product view. And I threw the word product out there just because I wanted to distinguish from using the word application or component. And I've actually used the word product before in the past to represent a logical view of the application. So that may be one terminology that we may want to work around, is the concept of a product instead of a logical application view, just to keep from mixing terminology. So those are the takeaways that I got out of that meeting. Anybody else have anything else? What were your thoughts on that?
I didn't attend, sorry.
No problem.
We did record it, Sasha, if that's something you want to, it's out there in the, it should be in this doc, the link.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll go check it out.
Steve, one more point that regarding the sharing of the components that was mentioned.
Right.
So for basically Argo, like each component can only belong to one application, but with the Spinnaker, the thing was that a component can be, what you say, how can we say, a component can be a set of microservices altogether. So that was and they can be shared among different application sets. So that
Yeah.
was the difference between them.
So Steve, did you get a chance to write up a requirements document for it?
No, not yet. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything. Like Crum was to say that I forgot about that. There's no really sharing of a component between applications.
No. No,
In Argo, in Argo,
in Spinnaker or in Argo.
Right.
in
I think,
Argo there is no sharing. In
yeah.
Argo there is no sharing. In Spinnaker, we can share.
In Spinnaker, you can does it track who's sharing it though?
So they were mentioning that it can, one component can belong to multiple application sites. So like in that way, based on that, we can like get to know like which component like is part of which application site.
Right. Yeah. In Spinnaker, I think they did it. I think it was called a job or workflow.
I don't know.
I have to look what the.
Now I need Marky because he was working for OpsumX. He would know. Well, I say what we need to do is pull together, get that requirements doc together, and I can send it to Isaac of Armory, and we can send it to Gopi from OpsumX and to Jesse, add into it. And then Adam Jordan from Netflix, and see if they can make comments on it and indicate if there's any glaring issues. Now Argo, because Argo doesn't have a CD pipeline, we have to integrate with Argo, I'm assuming, from the point of an action, like we do currently with Helm.
Yeah. So, yeah, if we wanted to use, let me, so, the interesting thing with like Argo is we will not necessarily, we want Argo to do the deployment. We would not be interfacing with Argo. We'd be interfacing with the Git repo that contains the deployment files that we want Argo to send out. So we go ahead and modify the deployment files, check them in, and once we check them in, then Argo would go ahead and deploy them.
So would we call Argo?
No, we would call Git.
Huh, okay. But then we can't pull back any of the location, right? Any of the we don't get a feedback loop from Argo that says it was deployed to a certain environment.
They do have what they call a post sync hook that we can be notified that the synchronization has been completed. But kind of what I'm thinking for us to work with this GitOps and even like with Spinnaker, where Spinnaker's grouping groups components at through a Helm chart, so they don't have a way inside of their tool to separate out a component. Everything is based on a file, which would be the Helm chart. And Argo CD is the same way. Deployment units are the basically the deployment file, deployment YAML. So everything is being done at the, and Spinnakers is done at the chart level.
Well, I guess what we have to do then first is just to solve the problem of tracking sets of.
And yeah, and I think that's one of the initial things I've been thinking about, and that's why I haven't really. I think that's going to be our challenge with these, and it's basically tracking GitOps. How do we do that? Now,
well, something like Argo or Spinnaker, they don't really. Do they care if we pass to them the deployment file, whatever kind of deployment file it might be?
no, the Argo is going to look at a Git repo.
Right.
And Spinnaker, you're going to set up their pipeline because they are a CD tool, and you're going to say, go deploy this Helm chart. This is a chart museum for you to go grab the chart from. So the Spinnaker side is more, I would say, normal. And the Argo CD and is going to be a little less. It's going to be very it's so specific of a solution, the GitOps world.
Yeah.
But the one thing I'm thinking is there a way that we can to monitor Kubernetes? Do we create our own agent in there?
No, I don't want to go there. I want to stay outside of the clusters because then we're dependent upon a cluster to track a change. I think.
Because there's open source agents that we can utilize to get notified.
Well, potentially we could go at a higher level and we could track the API gateway or an API registry.
So one of the things I've been thinking is if we get notified that there was a change to the cluster, we can we can do a basically some Kubernetes calls. There's a way to describe the whole cluster and everything in all namespaces, and that'll bring back this really messy YAML file, but it is YAML, so we can actually parse it into, use Python and or Go and parse it into a dictionary that we can go look through for the values that we want to look at. And in the description, let me actually show you what one looks like. I'm just going to go here because maybe we'll see how Google's running slow again. So I'm just going to bring up what we have for deploy hubs microservices. So if we look at the general.
So just quickly saying I wanted to come on, so I've been juggling a couple of things here. Argo CD does have I think it's a notification system, which can push notifications to various sources about the changes which are being carried out. On the diffing of Kubernetes, there's a couple of edge cases which we might run into. So if organizations are using a control and operator pattern, they might have services which are dynamically updating the API within Kubernetes with additional information. It's something we use at IGS for spinning up dynamic hardware controllers, for example. So there will be changes in the API outside of what's been put through code, essentially, as the application dynamically scales various components. Just something to be aware of on that one.
Yeah, and what we're looking at, so I just pulled up the deployment file for one of our containers. And the part that we're interested in out of all this stuff is basically the image name. Because once we have this image and the tag, whether it's going to be the tag itself or if they're using the SHA, either way, at the component time on the build side, when we hook into the build process, we capture what component, a nice pretty name for what this container, this image is for. So when, like you said, on through the notification process of like Argo, we can get notified that there was an update, a sync just that got done, and then we can go ahead and query the cluster and try to figure out, you know, which image was just changed as part of that deployment process. And from there, we can then mark in Ortelius saying that this deployment just occurred to this component, and maybe some of the other information we can gather would be, you know, the cluster name, which could be used as the environment that it went to. So we can get some of the basic information saying that this this container was just deployed to this environment, which is going to then translate back to on the Ortelius side saying that this component version was deployed to this environment. And subsequently, we can work our way back to the application version, the logical application that we was deployed. Now, if there's not a logical application, we may need to go ahead and create an application version on the fly to represent what is the mix of all the different running pieces for an application. So instead of applications coming out of developers world, saying these are my parts, that we start looking at it from the other side and putting together based on namespaces and some base information, like a baseline, that we could say that this is a new version of the application that are being pushed into this these clusters.
So I'm lost, Steve. I see how this is a path for integrating into Argo, but how does that solve the component set problem that we're trying to solve at the higher level?
Well, for the so this is solving the problem of what is being deployed.
Right.
So the next step is the
So let's just forget Argo for a minute, because what we want, the goal here is to be able to allow any deployment engine, Argo or other, to grab information about a component set.
yeah, and that's what I'm saying is I think it's going to be reactionary instead of predefined. So I don't think they're going to go into so like the way Spinnaker works, they do app component sets based on a chart. A Helm chart can contain, you know, 20 or 30 components in a single chart. A chart is not restricted to a single component. So in the Spinnaker world, the way they do a component set is by writing a very big long chart that says install all these 20 different microservices.
Right, which is we're trying to get away from monolith kind of deployments. We're trying to provide a way to give them incremental updates based on collections, a collection at an application level or a collection at a component set level.
Right. So under the covers, Kubernetes will figure out if something's changed or not. So Kubernetes, even though you pass it a full
Right,
Helm chart, it'll
right.
incrementally deploy at that level. So
And then we grab back what the information is. It says what was incrementally deployed and report on that.
right, that's what I'm thinking.
Um, I I was listening to you, and I cannot like avoid to thinking. But usually when I see this problem like integration, decoupled integration, like for any solution, uh, using Prometheus and an exporter for Prometheus that already use like a dictionary set, and then putting this data up to can be used with Alert Manager. And we already implement like some kind of this solution with you have Prometheus with exporter. You can implement like, I don't know, for flavors about taking metrics. Then you just uh, put it. You put available this information for other platform. And if you need this reactive notification system, you can use Alert Manager that is very light and works very well. So I don't know. That's for at least when I try to solve something like that, we use this, and it's really it's agnostic. Well, the only thing is little couple is the exporter. The exporter can be maybe ad hoc for Argo, for example, but it still can be if there is APIs at the end, so it's not that couple, but is the less couple I can I can think about it.
Right, right. And it's more, and that's the thing I'm thinking of. Is there a way we can be more general and, like you said, Sergio, instead of creating a unique solution for Argo and a unique solution for Spinnaker, if there's a more general solution that we can use, like you said, through Prometheus or some other lightweight monitoring tool or way that we can get notified of what's happening in the cluster.
So my concern about this path, and I'm just going to push you guys to keep thinking of solutions here, is that what we really want to be able to provide is a proactive solution, not a reactive one. So we want to be able to show what changes could occur if they actually do that rollout, as opposed to reporting on what did happen. Um,
Yes.
that is really the benefit of having those relationships built prior to a release. So I think that's what we have to keep our eye on the ball, that we're not just trying to put something together and throw it in and say we have something that can um, report on what occurred. I think we have to keep thinking about how our catalog should be uh, that, for lack of a better word, single source of truth before you deploy.
Yeah.
So we really have to, I think everything we do, we have to think about being proactive instead of reactive.
Hmm. I Well, for the reactive side of of solution, uh, I think the most cases is looking at the same image repository and source repository. So if Argo is just going to consume Git, it's all he does. So if we can have like a synchronization about what is looking Argo at repo level and image level, we can act like proactively. I think so. But the thing is how I don't know, how the project in Argo CD, we can know from the beginning where it's going to look at or maybe if they do some change or change the repo, I don't know, the branches, how we can get notice about that.
Right.
So, and this is just, I mean, Spinnaker and any other CD tool we interact with is going to act differently, correct, Steve? I mean, that's what I'm assuming.
Um, well, at least around component sets, uh, and so what we end up with is these deployable units that these tools are working with. So the deployable unit for Spinnaker is a Helm chart, and a Helm chart can contain many microservices. On the Argo CD, the deployable unit is the deployment manifest. And I mean, yeah, the deployment manifest, the deployment YAML, and you could put multiple deployment YAMLs into a single repository, because they're looking at it as they look at a single repository as a deploy for an application, what they're calling an application, as the deployable unit.
And does Spinnaker generate the Helm chart?
No, the developers generate the Helm chart. I believe Argo can work off of Helm charts as well.
Just
So
to,
I think that we have to treat ourselves like the developer passing the Helm chart.
just a very quick thing as well. It's worth taking into account. Spinnaker does support more than just Helm for this stuff. There was something which you're saying, Tracy, which I think is kind of triggered something in my head. I think there's a really interesting point here around there is what the deployment tool thinks it's going to do. There is what the Kubernetes API thinks is going to happen, and that's how the Helm dry run and the like if you're using Tanker, that's got a dry run mode as well, where it queries the API, generates a diff, and that's before deployment. You can run that step to say, okay, what do I think is going to happen? And that's kind of a proactive bit, I think. What do we think is going to happen? But then there's also, as Sergio was saying, the reactive bit about what actually happened, because there are situations where the proactive and the reactive won't match up. Sometimes edge cases with Kubernetes, I've seen it happen a couple of times, when what we thought was going to happen, particularly with Helm, isn't necessarily what happens. So I think there is value in at some point being able to see from a kind of view of what did we think was going to happen versus what is your actual current state. But I think there might be there's separate kind of problems in some ways, but having both at some point would be really useful to be able to say, this is what we told you was going to happen. This is what actually happened. And we can then start using that for actually digging into why more than anything else and feeding that back. On the proactive side, I think the diffs which are provided by all of the tools used, so Helm, Tanker, Customize, they're all pretty good. As for the most part, they're falling back to the Kubernetes API functionality, with the exception of Helm, which does it a little bit differently. Sorry, just my thoughts based on what you kind of commented on.
How about Ansible? Is it still being used? Or was that sort of fading into the...
Ansible is pretty, sorry, Steve, go ahead.
Well, Sasha and I ran into that at looking at his clusters the other day, and what we found is they're running, the one we were looking at was on AWS, and they decided to stand up Kubernetes themselves on their own VMs, EC2 instances. So they actually built Kubernetes, and they're using Ansible to build up the Linux machines that are going to run Kubernetes. So instead of using the managed Kubernetes, they were managing it themselves, and they're using Ansible at that level to build up the instance. And like Owen, like you're saying, I know Spinnaker does, do things like being able to deploy VMs and things like that in instances. I just was kind of trying not to complicate the conversation.
Totally fair. Yeah, the Ansible bit's an interesting one, because Ansible can be used for deploying stuff directly into Kubernetes as well as building the cluster, as so can Terraform, but I don't see them really widely used for that, to be honest with you. If a shop is already heavily invested in Ansible and they're beginning to explore Kubernetes, I have seen it done, but not much, very, very rarely, because it's pretty painful, to be honest with you. Same with the Terraform plugin, it's pretty painful at this point in time to do it either way. And they don't really manage state particularly well, which is, I think, an area where the state of it is the interesting part, but neither of those do it particularly well for Kubernetes at this moment in time.
Yeah, Ansible is taking more power in the multi-cloud side, because usually if you are working like things inside a cluster of Kubernetes, usually you are going to have more native tools, right? But at least at Red Hat, Ansible is positioning in the multi-cluster side, right? The hybrid cloud and stuff like that, because it's more broader. You can do more stuff inside the same Ansible, and you can integrate it with the rest of the tools. So it's more useful when you have these gaps between, I don't know, a broader infrastructure, multi-cloud and stuff like that. but specifically for using over apps and Kubernetes is not that strong because yeah, it's more it's more painful for saying in the same words.
Yeah, so let's, if everybody has a little bit of time, let's just run down the Spinnaker path in a proactive solution. So the way that they're saying to do a if you want to deploy 50 microservices, that you're going to have a Helm chart with that references the 50 microservices. Now that's the developer coding together a big YAML file to do that. Now, one of the things that we could do, we'd have to look at the hooks, but because they are a CI/CD tool, that they have plugins that we can insert in certain places, we could pull together, be inserted into that job in such a place that prior to them doing the Helm chart or whatever they're going to deploy, that we could actually gather together everything and consolidate it and then give them the single file to work with at that point. So that may be the one way that we can be inserted to do the gathering. The proactive is more of us doing the gathering of the services. And this would apply to this gathering would apply to a GitOps world as well. So at the end of the day, when we do the gathering of everything that needs to be deployed, we spit out a and we produce a Helm chart. Helm chart or deployment manifest, and pass along to the CI to the CD tools. So in the world of in the GitOps world, it gets a little trickier because the whole idea, well, if you look at Argo CD, and because they don't have a CI tool or a CD tool, that they're just literally just doing the deployment, doing a sync of what the manifest is in the Git repo with what needs to be applied to the Kubernetes cluster. That's all they're doing. They're just doing this sync process to see what's out of what the mismatch is. They still need something like a Jenkins job and the developers to go ahead and make the updates to create those deployment manifests appropriately for the right stage of the pipeline. So if you want to deploy to development and you want to have a certain namespace for development, and then you go to deploy to QA, your Jenkins job actually has to go and do an edit of the deployment manifest in the Git repo to replace the namespace, for example, and then go ahead and check it into a different branch in the Git repo, so it gets picked up. So the QA branch would get picked up and then deployed out to the QA cluster. So kind of what I'm thinking is that we can simplify that process for producing these deployment manifests by collecting together everything. Because if you look at, I was talking to somebody the other day, it was a gaming company. They have over 100 microservices that span 15 products, shared components, shared microservices between the 15 different products. And then that's just, that's not including all the different environments that they're going to. So, you know, managing probably 500 versions of the components is what they're looking at dealing with across their world. And doing that in a single Helm chart's just not practical, or in a single deployment manifest for the Argo side. Any thoughts on the proactive side that I just described?
Might
I
need a
was
little bit of time to
thinking.
process it.
I'm sorry. Go
Sorry, I
ahead.
didn't mean to cut you off, Sergio.
Okay. Well, real quick. I think we are talking about events, right? Like, and today events architecture, there is usually the couple way to do things is you just read in a sync way logs about the platform where everything happens. So I don't know if it's Git or there is a standard log we can use, but we can proactively being like reading logs about platforms. And today there is a lot of good architecture oriented of events that make you sure that you are proactively taking events and acting based on that. Even maybe the platform already do something about that event, right? So that's my thought about like we can do a really standard way, and maybe if we can work over, I don't know, the Git repos and images repo or logs and do in a sync way, we can do a really nice solution and can manage and you don't take much about who is going to consume this Git repo.
Yeah, I think the events that you're talking about are going to be more on the reactive side. So after somebody checks something into, they update a deployment YAML and they check it into a Git repo. That Git repo is going to throw a webhook event that will know that there's going to be a update coming to the cluster. So, but we don't know what that update was for. And what Tracy's talking about is a proactive view of, instead of us waiting for a developer to make some messy changes to the deployment manifest, that if we're able to take the information in Ortelius and generate the deployment manifest for them, that is for that logical view of the application, and apply that then to Git. So we'd be pre-check into the Git repo for the update that's going to occur to the cluster. Does that make sense now?
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
Owen, what was your thoughts?
I have no idea now. Sorry.
It's a tricky one, isn't it?
It's a tricky one. It's been quite a long week for a few reasons. So this is an issue which is very dear to my heart right now because it's an issue I'm facing actively, essentially, which I'm still trying to figure out how much of that architecture I can share, because it might actually work as a kind of base point to talk around some of this. I do think I need to process a little bit some of what was discussed on this meeting around the proactive side of things. It is a tricky one. It really is a tricky one because, yeah, I do like, if we're simplifying it, modeling it from almost like a pre-commit hook type style thing. Not quite that, but I think that's actually a really good way to simplify it. So forget about tooling, forget about, you know, Argo, all the rest of it, modeling it as a pre-commit hook. What would that look like? As we're effectively just dealing with files at that point, which are always the simplest thing to get down to. And even so, the way I've seen it modeled without the multiple branches approach has been almost like multiple data files in a single repo which point to different environments. And that might be a simple way just to drill down into what does the simplest use case of this look like. Something which will be deployed to multiple environments, which has variables in the repo for each environment. How would that look like from a pre-commit hook? Where does Ortelius fit into that? What can Ortelius add on top of that? And how can we maybe get rid of some of the manual effort in managing that to be more proactive? I think that's a simplified view to start with, maybe. but I still need to process a few things. I've got a slight outage going on in the background, so I'm also juggling that while I'm on the meeting. So
No problem. But
Well, I
that's
think
it's a good idea.
and this is a kind of a complicated. It's a, as Owen puts it, it's tricky. It is our first kind of big project for the open source community, so I think that we, chew on it for as long as we need to before we start coding anything, obviously. But I think, Steve, if you could take a stab at clarifying what we just discussed and incorporate that into the discussion from Friday, and get those docs out to everybody, that 2 weeks from today, maybe we'll all have had a little more time to let it bake.
Yep, we'll do. And I think the so if we take just one last comment before on this. So if we don't look at the GitOps world and we look at more of a traditional Jenkins pipeline, when you have a step that does the Docker build, we're able to do right after that step in the pipeline, after the Docker builds and they push the image to the registry, we're able to insert a little step in there for deploy for Ortelius to go ahead and grab what was done. So we know that this container, this image was created. It was based off of this repository, and we grab that information. Now we have a new component version in Ortelius. And if we have a baseline to start with, we can then rev an application version, the logical application version automatically. Now, when the deployment happens, whether the deployment's going to happen through Jenkins calling, kubectl to do an apply, or if they're going to call Helm as part of a Jenkins pipeline, or if they call Ortelius to do the deployment, we can record what just happened at the deployment time. So there's kind of like two worlds, two events that that happen. One is on the build side of when a component is created, and then the next is when this component is deployed and what was it associated to when it was deployed, and where it was deployed to. So those are the two major events that kind of happen in the pipeline process. Like I said, with the Jenkins world, it's very simple. Spinnaker, it could come about the same way, where they have multiple. I don't know if Spinnaker does a build though. I'd have to check. Does anybody know?
I think, if I remember correctly, Spinnaker can integrate with Jenkins to trigger a build, but doesn't do the build directly itself. I might be wrong on that, but from what I remember evaluating it a couple of years ago, that was essentially the workflow integration into other CI solutions.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't remember either. So, but that's the kind of like the two worlds that we have, is one on the build side, capturing what was built and pushed to the registry, and then the second part is the deployment part. Now, in between that is the organization part of how do I associate versions of components to logical versions of applications, or if we want to call them products. How are those associated together?
So just as a kind of last comment from me, and an idea of something I might try and, well, I'll try and get done over the next couple of weeks, it might be useful. I feel like having the equivalent of a persona, which we've done for users, would be useful for this, a kind of persona of what is a environment or a release process which we're talking about here.
Okay.
As I kind of mentioned, it's very similar problem to what I'm facing at the moment. I think I can probably create a sanitized version of that, which I'll bounce off a couple of folk. I'll get you to have a quick look at it, Steve, as well, just to kind of see if it's the same kind of problem we're talking about. And then maybe in a couple of weeks' time, if that's all good, we can actually use that as a reference to look at and talk about in a bit more detail about where does this fit into this kind of release process with a couple of environments, just simplified as we can get it, and use that to further the conversation, if that sounds valuable to folk.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
I'm just going to add in a note here for myself.
I've got a 2.5 hour internal meeting tomorrow about these kind of problems. So I'm hoping off the back of that, I can create something sanitized, which we can share and talk about.
That would be very helpful, having that kind of the core user problem set really does help define it.
So we want to create a persona around the pipeline itself, or what do you think a couple of the personas or what an environment is?
So I think there's a couple of parts of it. There's an environment, there's a collection of environments for promotion, and then there's the pipeline which handles that. And what we're kind of talking about touches on all of them, from my view, because you've got well, actually, to be honest, what we're talking about initially touches on just the environment and a pipeline into that environment. There's then the additional complexity of how you manage that across releasing to multiple environments in a way. And we've kind of talked about all of those different parts during it. So yeah, I'll give an update on next week if I think I'm going to be able to get something pulled together on that early next week, and yeah, try and share it.
Okay, cool. All right, anything else on this? It's a tricky subject, isn't it? The reactive is much easier. Like you were saying, Sergio, it's, you know, looking at logs and APIs and things like that and reacting. But I think it's for our benefit, the proactive is definitely going to be where we can help simplify the process.
I think it's kind of
it's providing that predictive information too, that is the ultimate goal of the catalog.
Well, I want to mention in the persona side, like real people like having some issues. Today is the what's new for OpenShift 4.7. So from today, Argo CD is in GA from our Kubernetes platform. So there is going to be a lot of people using Argo CD officially in Red Hat. So probably in the next weeks, we are going to have a lot of like people asking for help about using Argo. So I think I'm going to take a lot of feedback from that to where to have like real issues where we can maybe improve and do a complementary solution. I don't know, but that's the thing. Before this, it was Argo, like just, I don't know, bugs and some events, but not much people using it in the real world. But today is going to be massive in the OpenShift work. So I'm going to put attention on that.
Okay.
Yeah, is there and what's going to be the pipeline process that you're going to use with Argo?
It's super new. I'm not that update on how it's going to use it. At the beginning, like a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, Argo was like a solution for multi-cluster deployment.
Right.
I don't know if we are putting inside of OpenShift like in that way. I need to check it, but that was like the original idea about Argo CD. But two, we are releasing today the new version of Tecton 2. So I need to check how Tecton and Argo CD are going to work in this in OpenShift Kubernetes, enterprise Kubernetes that we are using. So that's going to be interesting, like pipelines in the new, because usually we've been using Jenkins. Right now is going to start with Tecton, and Tecton fitting with with Argo CD and a lot of other things, service mesh and all those. I don't know. There is a lot of middleware working inside the Kubernetes solution. So I'm going to try to understand everything about these topics, and I don't know. I hope to get some useful information for next meetings.
All right, cool. Yeah, because I know Simon from Tecton mentioned that IBM has something similar to Argo, which is called Razor. I think it's spelled Raazer. And it was a templating engine for pushing out to hundreds of clusters. So that was one of the other, and it's open source from IBM.
Well, right now, as part of IBM, we're in a parallel way, but I can say that OpenShift is replacing a lot of stuff inside of IBM. Well, not replacing, but I don't know, it have more potential for saying in
Right.
some way. So probably if they already leave this Razer, it's just going to leave for time to time, but it's going to be on OpenShift what is they are like pushing to for the new products.
And OpenShift, like you said, is going to include Tecton.
Yes, it's already in test preview.
Okay. All right, good to know. Anything else from anybody?
Yeah, I have one thing like is when I was in the cloud platform team at my like previous company FireEye, so we did the same thing like the proactive approach, like what Tracy had mentioned before. So what we did was independent of the cloud providers or the Kubernetes or the VM world, is that means we took the services which were which would be the potential like services like dependencies or upstreams, right? For Docker image build itself. So
Right.
that means we take the changes at the build level, and then we can take that and propagate at the deployment steps and see the proactive like applications, which could be the potential hits there. So that's what was the idea at my like previous company. But at Walmart, we have their own tool called Concord, a deployment tool. So I don't know say how these guys are doing here. So but I can check it out there as well.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about on the proactive solution. So whatever you did at your old company, please chime in on this discussion.
Sure. Right.
Well, gentlemen, and ladies, we've taken an hour, which is 30 minutes longer. I think it's a really good discussion, and I'm excited that that we've kind of grown to a point where we're having these kind of technical discussions, and we'll be starting to get some coding and some new releases coming out on a cadence that is required really by the CDF and the Linux Foundation to have updates and new features coming out so that they can talk about them. This is a big one, though. I think it's an important one, but it's a big one to start out with. That's okay, though. We can do it.
Well, I don't think that we're that far off. I think it's just going to be getting, like Owen was saying, get some of the really simplify the first use case, or one or two use cases or scenario. I wouldn't even say use cases, but scenarios. And I think that will give us a lot of a good starting point to work from.
Okay. And on that, we will, more to come. We'll get Steve to get that document out to everybody as soon as possible so that you can think about it in the next 2 weeks.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks,
Have a good
everyone.
week.
Yeah, bye
You
bye.
too.
Bye.
Bye.